Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Cabinet meeting. Have we any apologies? Does Paul need to send his apologies?
Got apologies from Paul.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. No,
and
yes.
The leader.
So clearly, Councillor Peatfield and Councillor Ndukwe Ono. Yeah. And apart from that, we're all here. Are there any apologies from executive scrutiny or overview? You can. Right, that's fine. Thank you. Late items. There are no late items, as far as I know. They're very late, we find out now. So, receipt of petitions. I'm not aware of any petitions. No. Do we need to identify urgent items to which call-in will not apply? We do not. Are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. We now go to minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of August 2024. As we look through those, just quickly, are we happy that they are a true record of the proceedings? Yes. Have we a seconder for that? Yep, thank you. And now we move then to recommendations from Executive Scrutiny Board. In line with the usual procedure, I intend to take those as the items arrive. Yeah? It seems the best way to do it, and it's worked well in the past. So we now move to item 8 on the agenda, significant to change to SEND provision, Kingsmead School and Markeaton Primary School, enhanced resource base. So, this item, I remember that Executive Scrutiny asked for regular updates to the programme of having enhanced resourced units or bases in our schools and what progress has been made. And this really is a follow-on, an enabling report which tells us about the provision for Kingsmead School and the removal of the enhanced resource space at Markeaton Primary School. This was the removal of the enhanced resource space at Markeaton was at the request of the school itself. And the way we're going to deal with it in future is that children will go into mainstream primaries and there will be support and advice about how they're helped. I personally have some experience of working in, well, quite a lot of experience in working in a school with a visually impaired unit. And there were quite a few different adaptations needed according to the specific visual impairment, its origin or its nature, or the fact that it would be deteriorating, which needed to be taken into account. So it wasn't a simple question, for example, of just making everything in a larger font. In some cases, the font could be kept the same, but the colour of the paper behind it, for example, would change. Yellow was a common one because white would glare for that person's with that person's condition. So all these adaptations that would be needed are totally within the scope of a primary school when it has the resources. Yeah, so the coloured paper, etc., and other forms of technology to support the child in the mainstream classroom, no doubt with a teaching assistant at their side. Yeah, so that's no problem at all. I think it's important to note that we need to consult on this, so this is a request and one of the recommendations. I don't know if the Director of Children, Young People, Director of Learning and Skills would wish to add any more to that briefing?
Just briefly, Chair, just to say, as you mentioned, we are required to get Cabinet approval to consult on an expansion of of pupil admission numbers, or indeed a reduction or removal of an enhanced resource provision. And following on your points around Markeaton, the reasons for the removal are to do with children's needs being met in all mainstream schools, rather than just an ERS, and that there are no more children attending Markeaton. So yes, it was at the request of the school. Just to add, Councillor Kerr asked a question at scrutiny around how we would support schools to enable them to meet the needs of children with visual impairments. And with that, the particular question was in relation to a point that you've just raised, Chair, about the preparedness of schools to be able to become inclusive and be inclusive. So to add to Councillor Kerr's question, I did want to state that inclusive environments, as she and you have said, are actually critical to ensuring that we can deliver an inclusive offer within Derby, and that children have a good experience of schools. We are indeed, at the previous Cabinet meeting in August, Cabinet did approve the spending or the investment of 1.5 million in inclusive schools. Part of that will be to enable them to become much more readily able to meet the needs of visually impaired children and young people. In addition to that, the Council has, and I have as part of a specialist team of staff that work with children with visual impairment, those who are deaf or hard of hearing, and those with physical needs. So we have a specialist team who do work with schools on strategies, as well as exploring the environments that the children are being educated within to make sure that they are fit for purpose, and where relevant, assisted technology to enable them to thrive. So hopefully that supports Councillor Kerr's additional question from scrutiny, but supports the discussions around Markeaton Primary.
Thank you, and I would hope that Councillor Kerr is reassured by that. There is the money there, and you know, teachers are professionals. They look at AHCPs and see how do we adapt and make reasonable adaptations to the campus in order to make sure that those children have the mobility to do that in a safe way. And it's a really good thing for our not or able-bodied children to meet children with a disability and how they cope, right? And it's really good. We had physical impairment children in the school as well when I was in a secondary school, and that was a really good thing for both sides, so they could mix and make friends among able people, young people, and also able young people were able to see, you know, people with a disability as someone just like them, but they could cope and they could get on with things and get on with their learning as well. So, I think we've really covered the Executive Scrutiny Board's question there. So, if that is covered, we'll look at now the recommendations. Cabinet, did you want to make any comments about this particular initiative? Councillor Swan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think you've given a really good explanation. Your experience of working in schools, I think it's been vital in terms of that response. But I think that going forward, we would all expect that where possible there will be integration with regards to all types of disabilities in schools, where possible. Because the reality is, when these young people go to college, university or work, you know, there would be an expectation that they would be able to integrate because the resources are in place. So I think this is a really positive step, and it's something that we should encourage across the spectrum of people with disabilities. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I welcome the recommendations and the consultation, because any proposal that can make sure that children are not sent out of the city to expensive resources, and they can be accommodated in our own provision, and more importantly in their mainstream schools, which is probably the best place for them to learn and be part of normal, communities, is to be welcome. So I hope the consultation gets a positive response and we can progress this. It's been long needed, and it's a positive step in the right direction.
And also, of course, it's great for the families because their children will be going to a local school. Are there any comments or questions from any other people here? Any other councillors? Yes, Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Chair. You've obviously dealt with the inquiry or the recommendation that was put forward by Councillor Kerr. As a general point from an Executive Scrutiny Board point of view, when the first paper came in relation to send changes in the city, one of the concerns that was expressed was the need for consultation. So we welcome the consultation on this. You will, as much as anybody, understand the sensitive nature of SEND provision for the parents and for the children, and there's a specific need, a more dynamic need for appropriate consultation in any changes to the SEND provision across the city. So we welcome that.
And I think it's also important to take parents with us on that journey because we have the interests of the children at heart. So let's have a look at the recommendations for this item, 2.1 to 2.3. Are we mindful to support those recommendations? Please show. Thank you, that's carried. Thank you. And we'll make a note about how we've responded to Executive Scrutiny's question. Yeah? Yeah, that there were that some reassurance was offered. Yeah, and that there will be consultation with parents. Right, so we now go to item 9. Item 9,
Thank you, Chair. So the report, as members will be aware, is the Q1 Financial Monitoring Report, and as regards revenue budget, the Council is currently forecasting a pressure of 9.643 million on the revenue budget. As we know, councils are legally responsible for delivering critical services, including children's social care for vulnerable children and their families, and children in the care of the local authority, social care for older and disabled adults, and also housing and homelessness. The rising costs in these are well rehearsed and continue to impact on Derby's budgets, despite additional resources being added to them within the budget planning process. There are £22.4 million of council-wide pressures emerging at Q1. This is despite the council having made savings of over £230 million since 2010 and investing over £24 million into services this financial year when we set the budget back in February. Our three most challenging areas continue to be children's social care, adult social care and homelessness. In children's, whilst there is some great work within our early help services, seeing the numbers of looked after children falling to around 550 from a high of around 650 some 18 months ago, we're still experiencing an escalation of externally commissioned placements, together with the use of unregulated placements for looked after children where a regulated placement cannot be found. This continues to place significant pressure on the placements budget. The total net cost of the most complex 10 placements is £5.349 million. That's just to give an example of real life costs. And it's not a unique issue for Derby, it's a national problem. due to the market for children's care placements where there's a shortage of specialist placements. For children's placements, we've seen costs increasing from £28 million in 2018 to a forecast of £57 million this year. In adult social care, demand is increasing, as are costs. For some packages of care, we have seen increases of 41% for younger adults supported in the community. Costs have increased too in this area from £60 million to £90 million over a similar period. In terms of our third biggest pressure, housing benefit subsidy loss arises when there's a gap in funding between how much rent a housing provider charges the council and how much the council can claim back from the DWP in line with housing benefit rules. In 2020, the council had 276 claims that resulted in a subsidy loss. The projected levels this year are over 650, with an associated £4 million pressure. The council is mitigating some of the pressures I've described through effective spending and vacancy control mechanisms. People services are forecasting 2.9 million, communities and plays 1.8 million, and the chief exec's directorate, £1 million, totaling 5.7 million, and will continue to do so over the course of the remaining financial year. For the capital programme, the full year forecast is a £254 million programme compared to an original approved programme of £219. 22 million of those changes related to slippage from the previous financial year. The dedicated schools grant is forecasting an in-year deficit of 9 million. This relates to the high needs block, which is a component of special educational needs funding, providing additional funding to schools and other educational institutions. There are no significant variances to report for the HRA. The Treasury has reached out to the sector to get an understanding of the things that they could do to alleviate the pressures on local government, as it fully recognises the financial unsustainability in the sector. Some of these items could include ensuring that any new burdens to local government are adequately funded, removing the cap on the housing benefit that councils can claim where emergency accommodation is used, reviewing the right to buy legislation to ensure councils maintain their housing stock levels, reducing the burdens of inspections and regulations, and reviewing the social care markets and capping the rates councils pay for the sector for care. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kozlowski, very helpful. Would you wish to add anything? No? Fine. Cabinet, any contributions here? Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Kozlowski paints a dire picture, and the report reflects the fact that we are year on year on year on year having to meet more and more demand with funding for local authorities going in the opposite direction in terms of resources. And where we have tried to shore that up, it's always been at the expense of our council taxpayers locally. So we are looking to a new government to see whether there are solutions, and the negative funding allocation for local authorities over the last 14 years. But we all know the situation is dire because the finances, particularly with a £22 billion deficit, black hole that has been revealed, means that we're in a very difficult situation. And I'm sure, I mean, these are Q1 figures, so, and as last year, the Q1 figures, officers have worked hard to sort of to look at this additional demand, in-year demand, and how they can be mitigated. And it's getting harder every year for us as a local authority, and as this report indicates, many authorities who are in much worse situation and have had to have special measures. So we will do our best as a cabinet having inherited such a negative financial position locally and nationally. But it's not going to be easy, and we'll have to work really hard to see how we can actually close the gap. But these are big figures, and they're growing each year, and we need to sort of look to see what we can do to tackle those. But I'm hoping that quarter two, our returns will be in a better position, but we'll have to do a lot of work to get there.
Thank you. Are there any questions from other councillors? Sorry. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Yes, just to reiterate what Councillor Dinser has said, I mean, this situation is one that nobody wants to inherit or see happen in year. One of the issues that compounds the current scenario is that whilst demand is increasing and funding is inadequate, over the last 10 years, lots of measures have been taken to, and opposition councillors will be aware of that because they've also been part of this process of looking closely at budgets and seeing where savings can be made and how efficiencies can be made and how we can do things differently to offer what are in the care arena statutory services. And that work is actually still ongoing. So that work hasn't stopped, and there are measures that we're undertaking in adult social care, for example, to ensure that the spending is monitored better and that actually, you know, we are offering the best quality service possible with the money we have as efficiently as we can. But obviously, having this process having taken place for at least 10 years, if not 12, you get to a point where there are fewer places you can actually go to make savings, and that's the scenario we are in. I understand that £50 million has been taken out of the adult social care budget. I mean, these budgets are complex, as Alison Parkin will tell you, because obviously you get one-off government grants for different activities. So, but from the base spend, £50 million has already been taken out. And so there does come a point where you almost run out of road as to where to go to find savings to deal with increasing demand. And so that work continues. It's not, there's no complacency. There's no throwing your hands up in the air saying, you know, there's nothing we can do. But at the same time, we just have to face the realities of where we're at as a city, where all councillors are at, no matter who would be in control, with some of these statutory services that require, as many governments have said, but few have found the will or the capacity to act on, some kind of national reform, particularly for adult social care, to see that we have a system in place that can adequately fund the growing demand we're seeing as a society. And until we get that in place, sorry to, there's almost a speech here, but until we get that in place, you know, we're not going to resolve all of these problems. Thank you.
Yes, I agree that the whole way adult care is funded needs to be looked at root and branch, and something more manageable for local councils needs to be looked at, even though we've got really difficult financial circumstances at the moment. And similarly, I know that there's some exploration on the children's side, looking at profiteering by certain children's homes, but very high need children, but really extortionate costs. And maybe there's some profiteering there, so we might get some. I know that's a smaller segment of the overall debt, but it is something where we could be paring off some expenditure.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just want to thank Alison for obviously going through this document last week with us with great detail. Obviously took a lot of questions from us. I know a lot of questions was fielded by our members on the Exec Scrutiny Board last night, and I know Chris will go through some of the points that are pertinent to me as well in relation to some of the scrutiny recommendations. First of all, I just want to highlight to Councillor Dinser regarding the £22 billion budget hole gap. I mean, you've got to remember from even the Treasury document that was released this week, that it was omitted that £11 million was put on by the current government. So to put the £22 billion on the previous government is quite erroneous. Obviously, talking about adult social care, which is obviously fully aware that that is a problem. It has been a problem for quite some time, along with some of the issues around children's services. But one question I want to ask is around AI. This administration made a big play on AI during the budget, and in the next document, it even has the Working Smarter phase, where it says phase 1 of the agreed artificial intelligence programme, which is on amber red. So can I ask how much of the slippage and the deficit around adult social care is around AI, and what are the costs of that? Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the reporting for Q1, we are reporting no slippage in savings currently at Q1 position, and that's predominantly because the phase 1 of the AI programme concludes at the end of August, and the Q1 report is up until the end of June. So we'll be assessing where we are in terms of any deviations from the current plan over the course of the next couple of weeks, and they'll be reported in the Q2 report.
Thank you. I thought that was the case. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, would you like a little explanation from what was talked about at the exec scrutiny meeting? Yeah, just briefly, Chair. Yeah, well, I'm interested, and I'm sure the board would be, about the Cabinet members' understanding of the exceptional finance support framework. The problem we see it, or was seen on the night, was that it's becoming an increasingly used way of dealing with tight budgets, if you like. But we think it was expressed that it's the start of the end, if you like, if you use this framework to borrow money or capitalise money to pay for services that actually you can't afford. That's where the Executive Scrutiny Board were coming on this framework. So yeah, I'm interested to know what the Cabinet members' view on the exceptional financial support framework is.
I just wonder how many councils have actually sought that after Q1. Do we know if any councils have sought that?
It's around 30.
30 at Q1? Yeah. Right. Alison, would you like to respond?
I can do if Kathy wants me to.
No, it's fine, yes, I can respond to that. So I think it's impossible for the Cabinet to agree to this at all costs. Until we receive local government funding allocation settlement. If at any point we did go to the government for help, it would be because we needed to. So we can't say we'll never do it. We are pragmatic about that we're working to not do it, but we can't agree to, at all costs, that we won't.
Are there any other questions?
I just wonder if what the Cabinet members' view is on the risks and the dangers of using that framework.
Well, I'm sure that if we were to go into that decision, there would be a lot of discussion with officers, and we would get a full understanding of what that would entail. So we're not planning to do that at the moment. So why would we seek advice about something that we're not planning to do? It might be there in the future, I don't know. But I don't see why we would go around planning for every eventuality when there's no need for it. So okay, we'll cross that bridge if we need to. Yeah? When it actually appears in front of us.
We need to be aware of all our options, don't we? Do you want to deal with obviously it's the words at all costs that make Cabinet unable to agree that recommendation. That's fine if you want to move on to the second one. No, read it, and I'll just introduce it from there.
Number two, the Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to agree that in relation to previous years unachieved savings, Council Cabinet should specify what actions will be taken to ensure that unachieved savings will be reduced, or will this amount to future years' pressures? So we'll deal with that first.
So, sorry, Chair, that's in relation to the over £600,000 worth of unachieved savings from last year, which is not an unsubstantial sum, and if it's not addressed, then it's only going to add to the pressures on this administration, in effect, to balance the budget. So we're wondering what the plan is to make sure that those savings are achieved. And bearing in mind that, as Councillor Smale alluded to, there will be one of the Executive Scrutiny Boards will be looking at the projected savings from AI, which, whilst it's not reported now as an unachieved saving, it looks extremely likely that it will do, particularly in adult services.
Yeah, so the work is underway as part of the planning for next year's MTFP, where mitigations have been found, and these will feature in the Q2 monitoring report.
And I think we can't go by without making a comment on this. Councillor Poulter will know that the unachieved savings from the years that they were in power were not in hundreds of thousands of pounds, a lot more. We saw it last year in terms of unachieved from the period when they were in power. And we've made great strides in terms of making this more efficient and actually having more realistic savings targets. So, you know, we need to keep that in mind. And even 600,000 is too much, I agree. But it's been a lot worse in previous years, and we're moving in the right direction.
And I suppose, yeah, we ought to look maybe back at a few Q1 reports from the last administration's time in office. September 2021, there was an outturn variance of £11,683,000, and £4.5 million was taken from reserves to reduce the outturn variance at that point to 7.238 million, right? And then in Q1 report of September 2022, the outturn variance was 645,000. 7.5 million was due to people's and adult social care and children. It was reduced to 10.826 million by taking 3.8 million from reserves. So a hefty amount of money from reserves. We aren't in that position. And we will need to make some serious efforts to make sure that we have a healthy amount of reserves. Otherwise, our Director of Finance will need to make a judgment about that, and we want to avoid that at all costs. And I will add the word all costs to that.
Chair, if I might just come back briefly on Councillor Dinser and your own comments. We acknowledge that there were unachieved savings throughout our administration. That's almost par for the course, but the difference here is we recognised that, we identified it, recognised it, and found alternative savings. I think the Exec Scrutiny Committee are concerned that there are no new or not sufficient new savings coming forward. And the figures you were mentioning, Chair, were obviously the overall budget. They don't relate to unachieved savings in year.
But, you know, the unachieved savings would be even higher, wouldn't they, in your case, if you'd taken less from reserves? So you mentioned making the point.
You mentioned reserves, Chair, and the last recommendation from the Exec Scrutiny Board refers to reserves. If you wanted to go to that. So on that one, Chair, great stall has been made about the use of reserves, and yes, we were forced into using an element of reserves during our administration, but in part of the manifesto, the pledge was to replenish reserves yourselves, which, yes, you put £4 million back into the reserves, but in the first quarter, it's evident that you're going to have to use that again this year. So it's a bit disingenuous to say that you've achieved the saving or the replenishment of the reserves, when in fact you're going to have to use it this year to balance the books.
But reserves are used were used by your administration for that purpose. So, you know, reserves are there. They don't kind of disappear into an untouchable vault that no one has the combination to get into. And circumstances may demand that we do that to balance our budget.
But the plan, sorry, Chair, the plan from yourselves was, of course, to replenish the reserves to a significant amount, to have it there for future use, not to use it the very same next year.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that the reserve strategy will be featuring in the MTFP, which is scheduled for October Cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor Kozlowski.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to consider the approval of the addition of a new scheme to the 24-25 to 25-26 Property Capital Programme of £147,000 for the refurbishment of the 2 artificial pitches at Springwood Leisure Centre, to be funded from Section 106 monies. The current 2 outdoor pitches at Springwood are at the end of their serviceable life. So, as I say, the scheme will be funded from existing Section 106 funds, and these stipulate the use for refurbishment of artificial pitches at Springwood Leisure Centre and improvements to sports centres at Springwood. The works would be planned to be completed in July 2025. And the time period of the scheme is at a time when customers at Springwood is at its minimal levels. Thank you.
Sorry, any questions from Cabinet? No. Executive scrutiny is not, has noted it, I think. Yeah. Were there any questions from other councillors on this particular item?
Chair, no, it was welcomed by the Exec Scrutiny Board and particularly the Oakwood councillors as a good use of 106 funding.
Thank you. Standing in for Councillor Peatfield, I'll just run you through this report. The report covers performance over the period of April 2024 to June 2024, although it is a shorter performance report as officers are working to implement a new performance management system, the benefits of which are set out in paragraph 4.7. The Council's budget situation remains challenging, as we have heard, so I am pleased that this report shows Council is still delivering our key areas of performance, delivering on our key areas of performance. Thank you to all our Cabinet members, our staff and partners who work hard to achieve outcomes for residents. Key highlights from the report include green. Our recycling rate is up to 40%, bucking the national trend. We also have worked to find more environmentally friendly travel options with 5 new EV chargers installed in Chester Green and transport improvements around the railway station that have made it easier to choose sustainable and active travel options. Growth. This quarter, 73 dwellings and shared houses have been improved to meet the decent home standard, and 25 private sector empty homes returned into occupation or demolished. The Derby Promise was also launched in May. Vibrant. We made more positive progress at Derby Market Hall, hosting trader site tours and launching our time capsule photography competition. On working smarter, between April to June, there were 2.89 working days lost due to sickness, which is a reduction from the January to March position, was 3.35 days. 72% of our priority projects were assessed as either green or amber stroke green, a position that has improved from 65% at the end of March 24. There have been 13 changes in project statuses since the last monitoring report. Positively, we have reached a resolution on the waste treatment facility, which was still red at the end of June 2024, but the updated position is presented in the report. There was a total of 18 strategic risks at the end of June 2024, with 3 changes in the strategic risk registers since the end of March, 2 risk escalations and 1 risk score has reduced. There is a full overview of the quarter presented in item 11, Appendix 1. There is one addition to the Council delivery plan for approval, and I quote, deliver requirements of simpler recycling, including weekly food waste collection by March 2026. Close inverted commas. Finally, the 2024 to 25 targets are also presented for approval. That's item Appendix 2 for this item. Any comments from Cabinet members? No? I think executive scrutiny has one, but would you like me to... Are there any questions from anyone who's not on the executive scrutiny? No? Shall we go to those recommendations, Councillor Poulter?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Of the things that came up for discussion, and the one of concern around the Guildhall, the proposal or the potential to redevelop the Guildhall. In particular, not just the funding from government, but the funding that's going to be required in general. But the recommendation from the Executive Scrutiny Board was to request an update from yourselves, from the Cabinet, on what communication has been taken place between the Council and Government and what responses have been received in relation to the request for confirmation of the Levelling Up Fund grant. It started with members proposing to ask you to write to Government, but then we were informed you already done so. So the recommendation is asking for who wrote to who and what the response was, please.
Thanks. So there's a bit of a history to this, isn't there? We asked for a kind of variation of the original amount, and there was a favourable reaction from the last government, but I think they were caught unawares maybe by the early election, and therefore were unable to do sign off any expenditure. So that left us in a tricky position. We were on course to receive the money and we'd had the nod, but it wasn't formally actually signed off. So we're in the process of a new government taking over, and of course it's looking at the books. I'll just read one thing out. Officers have been in a regular conversation with civil servants in MHCLG and DCLG, pushing for a decision. They have acknowledged that this is a really challenging period for all partners in receipt of Levelling Up Fund awards, but that they are currently unable to provide timescales as to when a decision will be made. They are continuing to press for a decision and have escalated our concerns regarding the impact of the delay to the decision. In addition, contact has also been made with senior contacts in government agencies, Arts Council and Historic England, who have direct links into government and are offering their support to insist in securing approval for Derby's Levelling Up Fund scheme. The leader has written to the Secretary of State for Culture, Lisa Nandy, raising the plight of culture in Derby and the importance of Derby's cultural assets, and local MPs have raised the need for a decision with the Secretary of State and Alex Norris, Minister for Democracy and Local Growth, whose responsibilities include legacy funding streams such as the Levelling Up Fund. We will continue to push for a decision. So I suppose the answer to the question is you will be updated when we get a response. Yeah?
Sorry, yes, Chair. So the answer is there has been no response despite writing to the two 11 ministers.
There has been no response yet. They've only just taken over. God knows how many requests they'll get about the Levelling Up Fund and decisions that were not taken because the election was called earlier than any minister expected and was then unable to make any decisions because of their purdah.
I appreciate that, Chair, but I think it's only sensible and right to get Derby's concerns around the Guildhall onto the foresight and to inform the ministers and get them to recognise the particular issue.
Yeah. And we are as one on that. And clearly we're doing all we can from a political level and from a kind of civil service level, officer to officer. And we'll see in the fullness of time what the result of that is. Very helpful suggestions from executive scrutiny, trying to help us to make the best decisions possible, and that's their job. So thanks very much to everyone, and I'll conclude the meeting.